strategy does not work, any strategy, you have to look at it and you have to change it. And I think what we see today is a situation where we have left the government to pursue a particular strategy, and we need to ask ourselves whether those strategies are working. For example, is the presence of KDF as a strategy to fight Al-Shabaab and to secure this country, is it working? That's a question we need to ask ourselves. We have our forces in Kismayu, but we have an entire 500 to 600 kilometers from Wajir to Mandera on the border with Kenya that are not secure, Mr. Speaker. That should have provided the buffer zone, but Mr. Speaker, our KDF forces are not there. They are right on the sea, in Kismayu, Mr. Speaker. And we need to ask ourselves, has our presence in that country helped reduce the incidences? Has the strategies, Mr. Speaker, the ones we are seeing in coast in Northeastern by the government, securities strategies which are enforced, is it helping reduce, Mr. Speaker? The reality is the situation is getting worse. The situation is getting worse, Mr. Speaker. Our forces in Kismayu has been accused by none other than United Nations through the United Nations Monitoring Group on Somalia. Their annual report, which is published every July, Mr. Speaker, and is available on the website of UN. The last 2 years, they have accused KDF forces in Kismayu. So we need to ask ourselves whether these strategies are working, Mr. Speaker. For a long time, our security forces have argued, the Kenya Defense Force, the NIS, the Kenya Police Service, they have argued that they have been incapacitated by lack of resources, Mr. Speaker. Parliament, last year alone, Mr. Speaker, voted 165 billion shillings to our security forces combined, Mr. Speaker. It is the highest after the Ministry of Education. It is the single largest sector that receives resources, Mr. Speaker. 175 billion is an awful lot of money. This government has made sure that our security forces have the necessary equipment. They have made sure that the security forces have vehicles, up to the extent of providing, Mr. Speaker, insurance to police and so many other things, in order to make it possible for police, for our security forces to act effectively, Mr. Speaker, in combating terrorism and other crimes. Mr. Speaker, in the Constitution, after the Constitution again, the government embarked on a process of reforms, particularly police reforms, Mr. Speaker. After many years, it was decided that we need a Kenya Police Service. We needed a unified command, Mr. Speaker, that brings together, for instance, the regular police and the administration police, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, even as recently as a few months ago, amendments were done to the Kenya Police Service Act to give the Inspector General more power so that he can deal effectively with his force, Mr. Speaker. Even institutions like the National Intelligence Service was revamped, Mr. Speaker, and given, literally they now get 17 billion shillings, Mr. Speaker, for their operations. Yet, Mr. Speaker, we still have a problem, even after all that has been done. And so, Mr. Speaker, the question is, where is our problem? And I have said in my motion, Mr. Speaker, that the key challenges we have are in three areas. One, in leadership of those institutions, Mr. Speaker. Two, in the institutions themselves. And also in the structure, the command structure, Mr. Speaker. In the institutions, we still have challenges. We are in a situation today where KDF is the one that is being asked to police towns, to police highways, Mr. Speaker, to prevent or to get involved in attacks like the one in Westgate, to be involved in situations like Lamu, Mr. Speaker. Internal matters for which our Kenyan security police forces should have been the one, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have a situation where there are still differences between the administration police and the regular police in terms of their working relationship. So we have, however, even more serious one in which there is no coordination. We have been told in Westgate, in Lamu, in Mandera, in each case, the national intelligence tells us that information has been given to police, and the police says we have not been given intelligence. Mr. Speaker, there is clearly a glaring disconnect between the different arms and the absolute lack of coordination, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, The police reforms, for example, that were being done in order to try and change in the leadership and change the structure, the command structure, you would say literally they have stalled. We haven't seen any fundamental activity in terms of the vetting really changing the face or the structure of these institutions. Mr. Speaker, all our regions face serious challenges. You've seen it in Kapedo, you have seen it in Turkana, in Lam, everywhere, Mr. Speaker. This country is faced with serious matter. Kenyans have been patient. What we are getting from the government is deflection, Mr. Speaker. Deflection means when something happens because of a particular failure, we are told it is because of something else. We are getting denials, Mr. Speaker. We didn't expect after the new constitution came into force that our government will continue with that path of deflecting, of denying, of pledging, of promising to do this. We expect, Mr. Speaker, and Kenyans expect nothing less. They expect actions. So, Mr. Speaker, we also expected under the new constitution, which demands public participation at all levels. Mr. Speaker, Kenyans expect involvement in policing their country, Mr. Speaker, because the constitution requires public participation. Yet, how many of the leaders in this house are involved in matters of security in their respective counties? What about the county government? What about the members of the public? If the leaders cannot be involved, do we expect the police to call members of the public to get their support, to get their, to get a buy-in from the public on some of the measures? So, Mr. Speaker, it is time we ask the Excellency, the President, to take action.